If I asked you to get a piece of paper and something to write with, and to make a numerical list of all the things that you would be willing to die for, how long is your list?
The Panther 48.
Willing to die for.
The Panther 48.
Willing to die for. How long is your list?
What is the tribal self?
The Panther
The
48.
tribal self is what goes above the immediate acquaintances of the social.
Willing to die
The
for.
family, the people you know, live next door.
You would be willing
I'm
to
talking about
die for.
tribal
The
self.
Panther 48.
I'm talking about those movies, those yet unborn.
So tonight we're gonna be talking about fear. And before I share the screen, a lot that's gonna get covered. So I'm gonna be doing a lot of talking. At certain points, I would like folks to express their thoughts and opinions and comments on what we go over. So let's build on this here. Just a second. All right. The propagated instrument of fear, analyzing the use of fear as a tool for mass control. It's important that we realize that we're referring to it as an instrument. Oftentimes, especially when you talk about psychological warfare, most people don't realize that things become instruments. And by something becoming an instrument, it is basically able to be used against you. And so that's the element which we're going to attach this subject today, is to go into how fear is propagated, which basically means it operates like a wave. It operates like something that is able to be projected out, and that is how it is used in terms of instrumentation. So as an introduction here, fear is a primal emotion deeply embedded in the human psyche, functioning as a survival mechanism. However, throughout history, fear has transcended its biological roots to be weaponized by individuals, governments, and institutions as an instrumental tool for social control. Let's explore various dimensions through which fear is employed to manipulate, dominate, and direct the behavior and beliefs of the masses. By examining historical context and its psychological mechanisms, we can better understand the pervasive role of fear as it is used to autopilot perpetual control in neutralizing our path to collective synchronized consciousness for liberation. The mechanisms of fear-based control. Fear-based control operates through a variety of psychological, social, and technological mechanisms. Understanding these mechanisms can shed light on how fear influences behavior and decision-making on both individuals and on the collective levels. Psychological manipulation. Psychological manipulation is the cornerstone of fear-based control. Techniques designed to generate distortion of reality and the creation of us versus them mentality serve to undermine the autonomy of consciousness and promote dependency on the governing from a select few. Cognitive dissonance is often exploited where individuals are led to accept contradictory beliefs to alleviate the discomfort caused by fear. The continuous advancement with technology and the line blur with video augmented reality feeds into cognitive dissonance more and more with each generation. Generation Alpha entire timeline has been seen through technological advancements on a rapid pace unlike any generation before it. So it puts them at a high disadvantage simply because we're talking about people, and should we say children, that are exposed to things from a technological level to where their comprehension and their brain can't necessarily keep up with what the technology they're being exposed to. And that's very important as we move forward in our recognition of how fear is an apparatus and a tool of control. Fear appeals in communication leads to heightened emotional responses, compelling individuals to act in a reactionary modes as a strategic pattern. And that's the key here, is that it happens to the point to where it becomes a strategic pattern. The classic fear, uncertainty, and doubt, which is referred to as FUD approach, is common in various contexts, from political to marketing, where fear is used to sway decisions and behaviors. Political manipulation is the powerful mechanism through which fear operates. The following key components illustrates how fear is utilized to influence through and the behavior. Influence thought and behavior. Excuse me there. Cognitive dissonance. This phenomenon occurs when individuals hold conflicting beliefs, leading to psychological discomfort. Fear can exacerbate cognitive dissonance, causing individuals to align their beliefs with a narrative that will not align with their previous values or knowledge. For instance, during a crisis, people may accept authoritarian measures as necessary for safety, despite the exchange of violations of personal freedoms. This is basically where you exchange your freedoms for civil liberties, which pushes us more and more toward the individual. Conditioning and desensitization. Repeated exposure to fear-induced stimuli will lead to desensitization. For example, continuing media coverage of violent events can normalize fear in society, leading individuals to accept increased security measures as part of their everyday lives. Over time, people may become conditioned to expect threats, making them more compliant with the measures that promise protection. Fear appeals. Fear appeals are communication strategies that invoke fear to influence behavior. These strategies are common in advertising, health campaigns, and political measures. The effectiveness of fear appeals often hinge on the perceived severity of the threat and the audience belief in its relevance. A classic example is anti-smoking campaigns that depict graphic images of the health consequences of smoking to deter individuals from smoking, but the money received by way of attorney settlements on behalf of smoking victims pay for the campaigns. And that basically leads into the concept of cognitive dissonance, simply because the same people that are promoting it are the same ones that are, quote unquote, trying to talk against it. So you get both sides, which create a weird concept that flows through your mind. Social comparisons. Individuals often gauge their own beliefs and behaviors in relation to others. Fear can exploit this tendency by fostering a culture where compliance with fear-based narratives is seen as a social norm. The fear of being ostracized or judged for not conforming can drive individuals to align with their prevailing narrative, even when it contradicts their personal beliefs, which goes into in-group versus out-group dynamics. Fear can be used to create a strong sense of identity amongst members of a group while fostering distrust and hostility towards outsiders. Political rhetoric often emphasizes threats posed by others, whether they are immigrants, political opponents, or foreign nations. This strategy not only consolidates power by uniting a group against a common fear, but also distracts from the internal issues. And this next picture depicts a good example of that. If y'all can remember this, at one point President Biden made a statement that if you don't vote for him, you ain't black. And by making a statement like that, basically what you cause people to do is to fall under that same guise of acceptance, which is just the tip of the iceberg when we talk about using fear as a tactic. So the in-group, out-group dynamics is highly emphasized and used in the political arena between Democrats and Republicans. Again, if anybody wants a copy of this, just put your email in the chat and I'll make sure we get it out to you. So now the historical context. The use of fear as means of control is not a modern phenomenon. It traces back to ancient civilizations, from the Roman Empire gladiator games to the medieval Acquisition. Rulers have often exploited fear to consolidate power and suppress dissent. The concept of divide and conquer is a classic strategy wherein fear of the others is used to maintain control over the masses by instilling distrust and fostering division. When you talk about the Roman Empire, in ancient Rome, fear was a fundamental mechanism for maintaining order and control over a vast, diverse empire. The emperors often staged public spectacles, such as gladiator games and executions, to instill fear amongst the population and deter dissent. The phrase "bread and circus" encapsulates the practice of distracting citizens with entertainment while simultaneously reinforcing loyalty to the state. The fear of social instability was pliable, leading to the reliance on authoritarian rule. And what we have to learn from this specific lesson is that the same practices is in place today and has been basically enhanced over time and is very much used as a means of control, which is why the entertainment industry operates the way it does. The medieval church, during the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church wielded considerable power utilizing fear of eternal damnation and divine judgment to control the masses. The Inquisition, for example, was a systematic campaign to root out heresy, employing torture and public execution to instill fear and maintain religious control. The church's ability to manipulate the fear of God ensured compliance among believers and solidified its authority. Now I'm going to show you a few examples of torture instruments that was used. And one thing we have to realize about this, and we'll dive a little bit into this later on, is that generationally, over time, the methods have set in place certain forms of what we call epigenetic patterns that causes the initial processes of fear to not necessarily need to be used anymore. Because as we advance as a society, certain things have been set into motion to where the population is basically on a perpetual path to where the previous things that happened also play a conscious role in being able to psychologically control the next generation. So you don't necessarily have to employ the same measure of physical fear and destruction that you did on the previous generation, because the damage has been done and it'll get passed, those levels of fear get passed on. So torture tools of fear-inducing propagation, saw torture. And what we're showing here is basically a saw was used, the person was hung upside down and the saw was used to cut them in half. And the reason for applying the technique this way, it created a slow death to where the person would be screaming, and those that are watching it are the ones that are receiving those fear energies. The propagation of that fear is being projected. And these kind of things resonate with newer generations in terms of the fear that it caused. The chair of torture. And this is a chair that was filled with spikes that would impale a person as they sit down and are strapped to the chair. The breast rip. Basically used to do exactly what it said. Rip the breast off of women. These are cruel concepts of torture that was used. The Iron Maiden. Some of y'all thought that was just the name of a rock group. This is basically the upright sarcophagus that was used to impale a person once it's closed. The wooden horse, are also called the Spanish donkey. The person would slide back and forth over this until their body is sewn in half while they're in an upright position. And they would tie weights to the person's feet. The prayer of anguish. Now this device here, basically, it was either used in a person's mouth, in the woman's vagina, or the rectum, and they basically would open the device up, causing obviously internal organs to rupture. This is crazy, folks. The breaking wheel. Body was basically placed on this until the bones are crushed as it turns. So now let's talk a little bit about this as it applies to aspects of slavery. Because what you have to realize is these things are embedded in a population. So what a lot of people take for granted or don't recognize is when we talk about this, and don't mean to offend anybody from a religious standpoint, but when we talk about these tools of torture that were used to get people to comply to a religious belief or you die, enough fear was set into the population to where something that would be obscured at one point becomes a major religion. And so religion at that point is able to be used as a factor of control which sweeps across the population. So few people recognize when you talk about the origin of certain religions that they are embedded in the fact that either you comply or you were killed. And so now when you have situations where there are billions and billions of people practicing it, it's because so much was done to create those initial responses to get people engaged and involved in them, that over time, through the element of fear, and fear is still used to propagate and promote still to this day when we talk about that, to the point to where it becomes second nature and it is passed on generationally. So you don't need to employ the same methods no more because it's all psychological at this point. So here, the perfection of fear as a tool of controlling American slavery, because that's what was done. At this point, by the time we got around to the American colonies, certain aspects of fear was perfected. The use of fear as a mechanism to maintain control and ensure the submission of enslaved individuals in the United States is a critical aspect of the institution of slavery. The very reason the United States became the world power it is today rests on the shoulders of prosperity by way of propagated fear. This manufactured system of oppression relied on psychological, physical, and social tactics to instill fear and prevent rebellion. Fear methods utilized to keep slaves submissive, whipping and punishments. No need to read through this, we get it. Executions and lynching. Now, this is something a lot of people are not familiar with. So before I even say this, we know that epigenetics, not epigenetics, but etymology of the word picnic does not originate from this. But yet what was happened is these postcards referencing pick a nigga or picnic from that standpoint in the American barbecue became repurposed. So the concept of a picnic became repurposed during this time period in American culture, because people would gather up, Europeans would gather up and burn a slave and hang a person and then burn them and refer to it as a barbecue. And not only that, they would make postcards out of these and send them to people, gloating about it. And you can, this writing is faint here, but again, just put your email and I'll make sure you get a copy of this document. It says here that this is a barbecue. And it's basically a postcard that one of these people sent to their loved ones, promoting and gloating and having fun over the aspect of what they refer to as a barbecue or a picnic. And you even had children that would attend these things. So these was like mass gatherings to where they would bring food, celebrate, and enjoy themselves over the torture and killing and the propagation of fear of Africans. So psychological manipulation components used during slavery are still under deployment today. Fear was not only employed through physical violence, but was also but also through psychological tactics that affected the minds and spirits of enslaved individuals. And that's the key here, is we talking about something that will perpetuate itself for generations on end. Dehumanization. Enslaved people were legally owned property rather than human beings, which serves to strip them of their agency and identity. This dehumanization fostered a sense of hopelessness and despair. The constant reminder of their status as property instilled a fear of losing even in the most basic rights, including family connections and personal autonomy. Surveillance and informants. A lot of us don't think about the concept of spies going back that far. But even The Art of War by Sun Tzu talks about the use of spies that have always been used in elements of warfare. Enslavers also often relied on the system of surveillance to monitor the activities of enslaved individuals. Trusted enslaved people were sometimes coerced and incentivized to act as informers, reporting on the behaviors or plans of others. This culture of mistrust created an environment where the enslaved individuals feared each other, further preventing collective action and rebellion, because you didn't know who was a part of it. Religious manipulation. Going into what we talked about, religion was and still is a powerful weapon of manipulation used to instill fear and obedience amongst enslaved people. Enslavers would often promote interpretations of Christianity that emphasize submission and obedience to authority. By framing their condition as divinely ordained, they instilled a sense of fatalism that discouraged resistance. Take note of the slave Bible. Family separation and social fragmentation. Fear was also utilized to fracture families and social bonds amongst enslaved individuals, ensuring that they remained submissive. Threats of separation. Enslaved families were frequently torn apart through sales or transfer to different plantations. The fear of being separated from loved ones served as a powerful deterrent against rebellion. Enslaved individuals often felt powerless to resist for fear of losing their families, which kept them at a state of submission. Division tactics. Enslavers sometimes employed divide and conquer strategies, pitting enslaved individuals against one another based on factors such as skill, age, perceived loyalty. By fostering distrust and competition among slave people, they reduced the likelihood of collective rebellion, as individuals were more concerned with their own survival than with solidarity. Note the Willie Lynch process. And this is a picture here at an auction block. You got a little baby basically being held up and sold as the mother reaches out to try to get her child back. Legal and institutionalized mechanisms. The legal system and institutional practice further reinforced the use of fear in maintaining the institution of slavery. You develop what was referred to as slave codes. Laws known as slave codes were enacted to regulate the behavior of slave individuals and to instill fear of legal repercussions for disobedience. These codes criminalized many forms of resistance, including education, assembly, and even the mere act of leaving the plantation without permission. The legal framework surrounding slavery served to legitimize the use of violence and oppression. This ultimately turned into what we have when we talk about the police state, militias and patrols. Enslaved individuals were often monitored by slave patrols and militias that enforced slave codes enacted as agents of violence. The presence of armed patrols served as a constant reminder of the potential consequences of rebellions, instilling fear in the enslaved population. Propagation and misinformation. Enslavers often spreaded propaganda and misinformation. Spreaded propaganda that exacerbated the dangers posed by enslaved individuals and the potential for violent uprising. This misinformation served to justify their harsh treatment and to instill fear amongst both enslaved blacks and free whites. fostering a culture of paranoia about rebellion. And so the whole point is that if anybody was out to protect or help black folks that were enslaved, then they could meet the same fates. Any questions or comments before we move on? Because we're painting the narrative with this. Because most of us are aware of this, but we're not aware of how, again, this has transformed itself into a modern day use of fear. So now we go into the post-World War II, the Cold War era, McCarthyism. In the United States during 1950s, the fear of communism led to the Red Scare and the rise of McCarthyism. Senator Joe McCarthy exploited fears of communism infiltration in government and society to launch aggressive investigations and accusations against countless individuals, often without substantial evidence. The fear of being labeled a communist or a sympathizer led to the widespread conformity and silence, stifling dissent in the political and cultural spheres. This tactic was also well deployed by the FBI and the CIA in response to suppressing activists and the justification for using the police as hit squads. Nuclear fear. The Cold War brought about a constant threat of nuclear annihilation, which was used by governments to justify military spending and aggressive foreign policies. Fear of nuclear war was ingrained in public consciousness through propaganda, education, and civil defense drills. This pervasive fear allowed governments to enact policies that may not have been accepted under normal circumstances, such as increased surveillance and military engagement abroad, which again is a classic example and a classic strategy that's still used to this day. Current context. And this is again how it starts transforming itself to just a aspect of a mental capacity, to where you don't necessarily need to be able to have to instill physical forms of torture. But terrorism and the war on terror. The events of September 11, 2001 marked a significant turning point in the contemporary use of fear as a control mechanism. The global war on terror, initiated by the United States, utilized fear of terrorism to justify military interventions and the implementation of extensive surveillance measures. The Patriot Act and other legislation expanded governmental powers under the pretext of protecting national security, often at the expense, again, of civil liberties. Public health crisis. In recent years, fear has been employed in the context of public health crisis. Notably, during the COVID-19 pandemic, governments around the world utilized fear-based measures to encourage compliance with health measures. While necessary for public safety, the pervasive fear also led to societal divisions. The fear of contamination became a mechanism for control, influencing everything from personal behavior to government policy. Which brings us right back to the fear of communism, which continues to be weaponized as a means of control. Take a look at the case of the Uhuru 3, falsely convicted for working on behalf of the Russia to alter U.S. elections, which we all know didn't make any sense as whatsoever. And this is a link to learn more about the case. And fortunately, they did not end up doing any jail time, but the mere fact that they were brought to trial and their homes were raided because they were accused of being communists from the standpoint of working with Russia, and act as if the Uhuru movement actually had the ability to alter U.S. elections and the power to do so. This is an example of modern day COINTELPRO, the same methods that was used against the Black Panther Party back in the 60s and 70s. So we got to realize it. It's still out there, people. It is still being used against us. Any questions or comments, anybody?
No, sir.
All right, let's keep moving. So let's get deep in the weeds. This is where all of this starts coming into play. Through the manipulated control of fear, emotional intelligence ends up superseding logical applications. The goal is to go beyond the basic awareness of how fear is a weapon of control and how much it is creating our collective reality in response to the acceptance of oppression. And that's what we're getting at. So let's explain exactly what fear is and how we process fear so that we can evolve and not allow this tool to operate against our destiny. In our collective reality, fear acts at the metaphysical force known as separation. And this is where we get the way we act today. It's key to the learned ways that fear operates. So fear comes through what we refer to as a trinity of fear. The trinity of fear is constriction, division, and separation. The control path of dumbing down your awareness provides the constriction. Constriction leads to the survival mode response that implodes into division. The division provides the creation of separation. And so this trinity of fear, in terms of the instrumentation being deployed, is something that happens subconsciously to us, which puts us in a position to where we are so immobilized that we fall into the inability to recognize how to operate as a collective body anymore. A spirit separation induces a psychological response needed to allow illogical, coherent cognitive dissonance. And so that's the whole point of the application here of cognitive dissonance, is because by creating that spirit separation, you create a path for your mind to not know how to really put things back together in its proper format. And this makes it possible, the conditional relationship with division, which takes us to separation consciousness, which is the ultimate attack because we are forced back into survival mode through the manipulating trifactors of fear, which takes us to fight, fright, or flee, or freeze. And at this point, the reptilian brain is in control and everything operates through a us versus them window of consciousness. From this, our consciousness is constricted and the process is able to repeat, and the cycle continues in this perpetual process that forms scarcity consciousness. And so in recognizing and understanding what we're talking about here is that through the propagation of fear, which is how it is deployed, taking it from a physical level, it then creates the epigenetic pattern that allows it to be able to become mental, which then at that point allows it to seed itself on a level that goes into a spiritual realm, and a level that it takes you to the next generation. So the level of deployment of the previous generation does not have to be as harsh as the following generations. And each generation from their own and their forth, when you talk about the perpetual process of fear and the way it's employed, is able to be dealt with in more subtle passages, which is why we talk about it from the standpoint of scarcity consciousness, which makes it possible for the epigenetic process to de-evolve our generational collective structure and trigger latent mutations for future people to be more inclined to docile behavior and lessen the likelihood of revolutionary growth, and thereby reducing the chance of collective synchronization. So oftentimes when we can't figure out why it's so hard for us to come together, why is it so hard for us to unify around things that we know are wrong, and actually be able to put ourselves in position of organizing and mobilization that can free us from the obvious issues, it goes back to how fear is operated through that trifactor. Again, constriction, division, and separation. is the trinity of fear that allows this process to work its magic. So propagation and media influence. The media plays a crucial role in the dissemination of fear. Governments and influential organizations often employ propaganda to manipulate public perception. This sensationalism of news reports, the exaggeration of threats, both real and fabricated, mostly fabricated, and the portrayal of crisis can create a pervasive atmosphere of fear. And this is what you see most of the time when you turn on the television and watch the news. Social media has intensified this phenomenon, allowing for rapid spread of misinformation and fear-inducing narratives. The 24-hour news cycle feeds into the culture of fear, keeping audiences engaged but also anxious, ultimately leading to a population more susceptible to control. The role of media in amplifying fear cannot be overstated. Various mechanisms allow media to shape public perception and instigate fear. One being selective reporting. Media outlets often choose which stories to report based on their potential to attract viewers or readers. Sensationalizing violence, disasters, or crime creates a perception that such events are more common than they are. This selective reporting can skew public perception, leading to the exaggerated fear of crime or terrorism. One example of this that a lot of us can associate with just anywhere, but in particular, one of the things that I find funny is like when there's an earthquake here in California, I get a phone call from folks down south where I'm from asking me, hey, are you all right? And I'm like, what do you mean? I heard y'all had an earthquake up there. And it's like, it to them, it seems like this, life-threatening situation to where California done fell off into the ocean because of the way things are reported, and again, how it is propagated over and over and over. Not to play down the fact that natural disasters are happening and people are dying on a day-to-day basis, but the way things are reported and propagated, it puts everybody in this state of shock that causes us, again, to operate through the trifecta of freezing or the lower levels of what we call fight, flight, or freeze. The number 2 section here, which is framing. How an issue is framed significantly influences the public's perception. For example, framing a health crisis as an outbreak rather than rising incident can invoke a stronger emotional response. The language used in media narratives can steer public sentiment, often inciting fear and urgency, which is intentional, people. Echo chambers and filtered bubbles. The rise of social media has facilitated the creation of echo chambers where individuals are exposed primarily to information that reinforces their existing beliefs. Algorithms that curate content based on users' preferences can perpetuate fear-based narratives, isolating individuals from alternative viewpoints and amplifying their anxieties. And this is, again, constantly being bombarded with most of us. When you see people stuck on their cell phones watching brain rot stuff over and over and over, these algorithms will keep you inundated with whatever it is that you think you want to see and feed you more of it. Number 4, crisis communication. During crises, governments and organizations often communicate using fear to prompt immediate action. While this can be effective in mobilizing the population during emergencies, natural disasters, or pandemics, it can also lead to long-term anxiety and a culture of fear. The messaging emphasized potential dangers without providing constructive guidance, leading individuals feeling powerless. So the dependency for the current political environment is strengthening. And that's the point, is because we're not seeing how all of this creates this condition that we find ourselves subjugated on, which takes us to the normalization of surveillance. In an age of technology, media narratives often promote the normalization of surveillance as a necessary measure for security. The portrayal of surveillance technologies as protective tools against crime or terrorism is meant to lead the public to public acceptance of privacy invasion in exchange for perceived safety. This acceptance is often reinforced by fear-laden narratives surrounding threats to public safety. Institutional deployment mechanisms. Institutional deployment mechanisms also play a significant role in perception of fear-based control. Legal framework and legislation. Governments will enact laws that limit civil liberties in the name of national security. Laws that allow for increased surveillance, detention without a trial, or restrictions on assembly in order to create a culture of fear where citizens are hesitant to express dissent. The war on terror, for example, led to legislation like the U.S. Patriot Act in the United States, which expanded governmental powers under the guise of protecting citizens from external threats. Take note of H.R. 9495, which is something we're dealing with right now, if y'all are not familiar with it, which is referred to as Stop Terror Financing and Tax Penalties on American Hostage Act. It's a nice fancy way of saying it gives them the ability to go in and pick and choose especially how organizations or corporations or nonprofits are utilized or structured to where it can be considered a terrorist organization. And by doing so, now all of a sudden they can control how nonprofits operate way beyond their intended nature. And I urge everybody to check this out, because this is again a modern day version and a uptick per aspect of the U.S. Patriot Act. Law enforcement and military presence. An increased presence of law enforcement and military personnel in civilian life is used to create an atmosphere of intimidation. When citizens are constantly reminded of the power of the state apparatus through visible enforcement, they are less likely to engage in resistance activities. The militarization of police, especially during protests, serves to instill fear amongst the populace. Note and learn about Cop City. For those of y'all that are not familiar with what's happening on the outskirts of Georgia, please check out this link on Cop City. Again, if you want this document, shoot your email in the chat and I'll make sure you get a copy. Now, how the educational system is used. Fear can be ingrained in the educational system through a curriculum that emphasizes the danger of certain behaviors or ideologies. By fostering a fear mindset from an early age, institutions can shape a generation that is more receptive to fear-based narratives in adulthood. And again, this is how it's reinforced and passed on from generation to generation. Also note the removal of critical race theory. And I urge you again to go check out this document to learn more about that and how the educational system is being manipulated and used to create levels of docileness in our population. Last section here, conclusion and solutions. Awareness is the first step toward resistance, but awareness is not the solution, people. And that's the reason why we're covering it this way, because pretty much most everyone should be aware of those certain fear tactics that we talked about. But again, recognizing that fear is used as an instrument of control, and various ways in which fear is deployed creates an entire culture of fear, to the point to where subliminally and unconsciously we act the way they want you to act, and we're not able to change our pattern. The weaponization of fear remains a potent tool for controlling mass populations. As society continues to devolve, it is imperative that individuals and the masses become aware of the mechanisms of fear manipulation and critically engage with the narratives presented to them. Direct intentional action with toys. And for those of y'all that are not familiar with what the Panthers say when they say toys, is tools of your surroundings. So what we're saying here is direct intentional action with the tools of your surroundings is a full participation requirement for collective liberation. Whether we are talking about the overturning of power, the maintenance of power, or the destruction of power. Looking at this another way, what we're saying is, if we are not in control of our environment, if we're not in control of things that are even from the standpoint of like talking about a cell phone or a smartphone, if we're not actually in control of it, and people, when we say control of it, that don't mean you got it in your hand and you know how to use it. Because most of the time, when you really break it down, our cell phones are using us. So much data is passing between how you input and how you respond to that cell phone based upon the things that you do, the things you say, and what you serve. You are providing an inundative amount of information about yourself and about those around you, which will allow, again, a psychological pattern to be constructed that supercomputers can use to turn around and employ and deploy mass manipulation. On another note, on a technological level, Google just created a chip called the Willow. I urge y'all to go check that out. Now, this Willow chip is another step forward in terms of technological might and power, to where they're even referring to this chip as being potentially able to cross into what they call the quantum realm of consciousness. This is amazing stuff, people. When you find out what's taking place in the field of technology at that level, you start hearing things that most of y'all think are only related to comic books. But quantum physics is a real thing, people. To combat the detrimental effects of fear-driven control, we must seek to foster resilience, encourage an open dialogue, and promoting the ability to discern the weaponization of applications, because that's where the power is kept, in the weaponization of how things are deployed. Living with purpose will connect you to something greater than the shadow of the unknown. Purpose will turn obstacles into opportunities. Fear feeds on uncertainty, but knowledge provides the clarity, thereby giving a new perspective on conditional reality. So people, we have to live with purpose. We have to live in purpose. Change must become your friend in order to grow. And when you embrace change, you are able to harness revolutionary patterns, which become visionary projection. And this offsets the docile nature in which we've been skewed to be under control. By suppressing the natural ability for adaptation, fear finds a nice home and will neutralize the future you in crystallization. Understanding our emotional intelligence is what provides a proper response to nonlinear supreme intelligence of self, and recognizing fear as the ultimate strategic instrument of control, targeting the unconscious masses. These applied steps are a must if we are to empower individuals to resist manipulation and reclaim agency back over our lives. Our collective strive in the practice of self-determination must transcend the linear hardships of oppression. This only comes with revolutionary discipline, intentional direct progression, and foundational generational advancement, aka living on purpose, people. What I meant to say here, you take for everything you take forward in purpose, fear is required to take a step in the opposite direction. This is a natural law of development. To keep us individualized in fear promotes obedience and control. To break free into freedom, you must be willing to let go of your personal attachment to doubt, worry, and the false belief of security in a world that lives in motion. And this is to outpace the standing still is the enemy of self. To defeat fear, one must become intimate with fear. You have to give it a balanced presence within your realm of being. The embodiment of propagation has to be a conscious action within all biological systems of existence in order to be set free for total ecological operation. The Black Panther Party San Diego chapter 10-point platform number 1. We are gaining our freedom. We promote the power of practicing self-determination, determining the destiny of our communities, and defining the Black nation. So with that, folks, that is the end of the presentation. Does anybody have any questions, comments? And again, if you want a copy, you just put your email down and I will make sure you get it. Nobody got any questions or comments?
Great job as always, Chairman.
Thank you, sir. All right, well, I will tell y'all, definitely absorb the information. Make sure I get this document out to y'all. And we need to do our best to evolve and change the consciousness of our people and get to work. All power to the people.